And when we're talking Ontario on a per capita basis, and I know you said somewhere north of $9,000 per person.
Oh yes, I mean in terms of the total amount that's being spent in Ontario, it's actually more than that. Um, but if we do it like on a GDP basis too, so we can kind of compare the provinces, because some provinces are bigger, but they have bigger
Right.
economies, and so Ontario is sort of at the low end of the range of spending in the big provinces, spending about 1% of GDP, similar to what Alberta is spending, actually about 1% of GDP. Quebec is in the middle, spending about 1.5%. And then BC is actually spending the most at 3% of GDP. What that means is that BC is spending 3 times more than Ontario is once you adjust for the size of their economies.
Okay, so given that, and we're getting into, like, I read parts about contingency funds, and I know Ontario isn't the only province that has that contingency funds, but I think when I was reading, it was one of the biggest. Want to tell me a little bit about that? What seemingly is money that is unspent by the provincial government right now?
Yeah, so several of well, in fact, 6 out of 10 provinces are maintaining some sort of unallocated fund. So these funds are built in the budget, so they're counting as an expenditure. They count against the deficit. They're sort of there, but they're not for anything in particular. They just sort of have a COVID-19 label on them, but they're not for buying PPE, or they're not for supporting jobless Canadians or something like that. But they are in the budgets. Now, Ontario has the biggest one of these unallocated funds at $6.4 billion. It's quite a substantial fund. 2.4 of that 6.4 is from a contingency fund that's allocated till the end of this year. And so hopefully they'll spend that money, but at present it's not for anything in particular. One of the big expenditures they haven't costed yet, but would likely eat into this contingency fund in Ontario, is the new business grant support program. That was announced in December. Now, there isn't any costing on that. But so we got this 2.4 that's with us right now on the books. And then on April 1st, there's another $4 billion in contingency funds that will come into play. It's called the Pandemic Fund. And so my report looks at anything that's allocated from 2019 through 2022. And so you get the total amount of $6.4 billion in unallocated funds in Ontario budgets.